In the immortal words of folk rock legend Ani DeFranco, every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to my channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below. It's going to give you a pretty good overview of what we do here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is a little bit of a different video because this is our Doctorate Level series. This is where we revisit a subgenre that we already talked about previously in a different video, and then we recap that, and then we add a 4th new Doctorate Level selection, another movie to the subgenre that is maybe a little bit more deeper cut or niche, or sometimes it's just a little bit more new or a little bit more loved by horror fans and not as well known by the mainstream. You'll get an idea. Just adding another movie to the conversation, another excuse for us to revisit some of these really fun subgenres. The fun subgenre that we're revisiting today is the fighting back subgenre. And if you saw the previous video on fighting back, I made the distinction between these movies and revenge movies, even though there's a lot of overlap. These movies are kind of all under one bucket, arguably, but I like them a lot, so I want to talk about more of them. So I kind of got a little bit more nuance there. And the nuance that I focused on was that revenge movies are about people going and seeking revenge for a past wrong, something that has happened to them in the past, even if it's the recent past, that they're going back and getting revenge on. Whereas fighting back movies tend to be more in the moment, somebody who's being wronged presently and is fighting back, not allowing that wrong to occur or trying to fight back against it. So is it splitting hairs? Yeah, it is a little bit. It's just really, again, an excuse to talk about more of these kinds of movies, these retribution movies, because I enjoy them very much. And fighting back in particular tends to be very fun. We talked about this in the previous video too, that the fighting back subgenre overall seems like a little bit more fun, a little bit more like fantasy fulfillment than the revenge movies, which tend to often stem from a really serious and dark type of event in the past. It's there's the rape revenge movie that is fairly common, and so the fighting back movies tend to be a little less dark, not always. Like some of the ones we talked about in the previous video are dark too, but there is a tendency for them to be pretty fun, and we focused on that a lot in the previous video. As a result of this fun thing, these movies can be arguably more mainstream than revenge movies, which tend to be a little bit more for the horror fans. There's exceptions to every rule, of course, but we looked at some ones that we thought were pretty mainstream, pretty fun, and we're going to go ahead and recap what we looked at right now. The first fighting back movie that we looked at in the previous video was Ready or Not. And Ready or Not is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I talk about fun fighting back movies, because this movie is focused on being fun and funny, but also super gory. And it's really the kind of movie where the less you know about it, the better. And we danced around that quite a bit in the previous video, trying not to spoil it for anybody. But the less you know, the better going in, even though the trailer kind of spoiled a lot of it. But even if you know what the movie's about, it's still a wild, fun ride. It's got a really strong cast, led by Samara Weaving, who we talked about quite a bit, praised her quite a bit in the previous video. And we really liked how it balanced the comedy and the thrills. The movie is still spooky or scary or thrilling or disturbing, even though it's also really, really funny. It's a very perfect blend balance, and it is why it was able to be more of a general population type movie. It really hit the mainstream very well. This movie has a lot to like about it. I was very high on it then. I'm still very high on it now. I know they're doing a sequel to it. I'm not so sure about that, but the original one is definitely worth your time. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely take some time and check it out. And the next fighting back movie we talked about was You're Next. And this was another fun one. This is a home invasion movie that kind of turns it on its head and comes up with some fun surprises. And another one of these movies where the less you know is probably the better. And it's a really well-made movie by Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett, who we've talked about multiple times on the channel. They're a very good filmmaking pair, writer and director. And they come from the mumblecore type of filmmaking, which is indie style, very authentic and realistic. And we talked about that quite a bit in the previous video. And we'll be talking about mumblecore again in the future. I promise it then. I'm promising it again. We are going to get into mumblecore and mumble gore, but we'll get that into the future. We talked a lot about the cast in this one too and how good they were, especially Shawnee Vincent as your lead. She is key to this movie working really well. It's got a lot of good gore in this one as well, some surprising violence that works really well for the movie. It's shocking, it's fun and funny. If you like gore stuff, this is a good movie to watch, but it's also just a thrilling ride. They did a really good job of taking what you know about home invasion and really just using that to surprise you in a very fun way. Another one that's a high recommend. And the last fighting back horror movie we looked at for the syllabus was Don't Breathe. And Don't Breathe is a little bit more uncomfortable than the first two movies we looked at. It's got some subject matter that's a lot more dark and, kind of going against what I was talking about earlier. It's less of the fun movie and more of the kind of dark and serious tone, but it still winds up being a wild ride in no small part because of how it's made and the premise of the movie with the blind man being the victim of the movie and the way it's been directed by Fede Alvarez, who is a noteworthy horror director we've talked about a number of times on the channel. Most recently did Alien Romulus, but what he's done here with the visuals and the sound design in particular to enhance this experience of this cat and mouse game between these criminals breaking into a blind man's house. And the way that they did some twists on this too is a really good twist in how the focus is on the criminals and how the victim may not necessarily be a good guy. We didn't want to spoil things too much, and I still don't, but it's a really interesting twist where you've got, the victim fighting back, and then you've got the criminals fighting back, and you've got this kind of twisting thing where you're not really sure whose side you're on, and it's great. And the cast that Stephen Lang and Jane Levy, really strong cast that delivers this story as well. So it's a really good movie. It's just not necessarily the easiest to watch for people. And then they made a sequel that causes some problems, but we got into it more in the original video. But if you haven't seen the movie, I would say check it out, but maybe do a little research first in case you are sensitive to certain things. So that's a recap for our previous video, the movies that we looked at. But now I want to go ahead and dig into our new doctorate level selection. Our doctorate level selection for the fighting back subgenre is Becky. Becky came out in 2020, and it was directed by a filmmaking pair named Jonathan Millett and Carrie Murnion, and I'm not familiar with their work at all. The only thing I know about it is Becky, and it was a movie that seemed like it really found its audience. It came out in 2020, like I said, and it came out for the pandemic and really seemed to find its audience. It had a lot of buzz at the time, and that buzz seems to have quieted down in subsequent years to some degree, and maybe that's a little unfortunate, but I really like this movie, so let's get into it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a blended family that is moving into a lake house and trying to sort out some family drama when they get interrupted by a gang of escaped white supremacist Nazi criminals who are looking for something at the house. And the young daughter, Becky, who is 13 years old, is not actually captured with the rest of the family, and she has to fight back and try to save her family and defeat these criminals. And of course, many hijinks abound as she's trying to do this. But we're going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie for anybody. But the movie has a kind of an elevator pitch tagline of a horror version of Home Alone. And that's a pretty good pitch. That idea is fun. The idea of taking Home Alone type traps and a kid taking on criminals that are trying to break in and making those traps lethal is a lot of fun. That's a great idea. But what's nice about Becky is it doesn't just stop there. It's not just a Home Alone, a horror Home Alone, because it's not even that much of a horror Home Alone, to be honest with you. It's really not quite as Home Alone as people would maybe have you believe. But it does have homages to other movies, and it's kind of interesting. These other movies like Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave and even like Fight for Your Life. There are some interesting and kind of overt homages to these other movies that are pretty heavy movies. And it's interesting because I think it adds a layer of seriousness and gravity to this movie that is admittedly just kind of a fun fighting back fantasy romp of a little girl who's going to kick some ass. And I love it. The movie sets up with a pretty strong but familiar premise of escaped convicts coming into somebody's home, crashing into some secluded house in the woods. We've seen this a number of times before, including some of the movies that I just mentioned. And so it's a fairly, classic, but also, you know, stereotypical opening and setup. But the twist of the angsty young teen girl who's dealing with her mother having passed away recently and her father deciding to remarry and having all this pent up rage as a 13-year-old girl, that's a nice addition to this formula. This idea that she has this backstory, and it spends some time giving you the backstory. It gives you an insight into what her life is like, what her relationship with her father is like, and what her relationship to her future stepmother and stepbrother is like. And you get the sense that she is a petulant teen who has a lot of unresolved issues and probably should be getting therapy for it, but she's not necessarily expressing herself in the best possible way, and she has a lot of pent up rage. And it's important because if you're going to buy into the stuff that happens later in this movie, you need to believe that she is one pissed off little girl. And I do. I do. I think that they do a really good job of selling me on a girl that is so angry that she's able to go to the places that she does. And it's important because you're going to have to suspend your disbelief for this one a little bit. The idea that a 13-year-old girl, a small one at that, is going to be taking on these very large, seasoned criminals, violent, dangerous, homicidal killers is a bit of a stretch of your disbelief. You know what I mean? You got to suspend it quite a bit. But if you do, I think you're rewarded with having a really fun time, you know? And the movie does take some measures to try to kind of give you some aid into believing some of the things that you're seeing. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to suspend your disbelief. And I think a lot of people who don't like the movie couldn't do that. They couldn't get past the aspect of this little girl being able to do some of the stuff that she does. I didn't have that problem, and I was having a good time. And part of it is also because the movie is well cast. Like the Lulu Wilson who plays Becky, she plays the main girl. She's from Haunting of Hill House, and you've seen her in a couple other things too. Haunting of Hill House, she's a real standout there, and she's great here. And a lot of the positive reviews of this movie, which is very well reviewed, were focused on her performance because she is really good. She nails the angsty teen part of it, but she also has the underlying vulnerability that you need to have to buy into the backstory. And she's doing all of that really well. And then when she gets badass mode, you buy into it because of the performance. Like the physicality is not quite really there, but it doesn't matter because A, she's selling it with her acting, and B, you're having a good time. And then the counterpoint as the main villain is Kevin James, who I'm not a fan of. I don't really like him. I never watched King of Queens, and I never watched Paul Blart was not for me. And what's the one where he's like a pathetic guy that Will Smith's trying to teach how to be cool? I don't whatever. Like I've never liked Kevin James, but he's good here. He's good here, playing it straight, playing it serious, being intimidating, being physically imposing, and being very calm, not overplaying it. He doesn't get King Kong got nothing on me. He doesn't go really big. He plays it kind of understated, and it's very effective. You know, he's got the big swastika on the back of his head, and he's trying to be really menacing, but I think he does a really good job of pulling it off. I frankly forgot I was watching Kevin James, and that's saying something because again, I don't like him, but I got to give him the credit. It's good here, and the two of them pairing off against each other, really good. The dialogue between the two of them, the face-offs between them, worked for me very, very well. And you've got this group of Nazis that are, white supremacists that are being overtly bad and everything like that, and you're rooting for them to die. Like I said, these fighting back movies are often kind of fantasy fulfillment things, and seeing her take out a bunch of Nazis, that's fun. That's fun. And in kind of Home Alone type ways. And then, like I said, switching over to like I Spit on Your Grave style ways and stuff like that. It gets dark. It gets pretty gruesome. And there's a lot of underlying really crazy, like traumatic things going on in this movie. And they don't necessarily delve into them as much as they maybe could or should, but they do a good job of not ignoring them either. It's not a total laugh riot. They treat this with the proper gravitas. It's not a comedy. It's not funny. It's played straight, and I think it's very effective. And it's got some very effective gore to go along with it. Some of the scenes in this movie are super gory and bloody. The eyeball scene in particular I was shocked when I saw that it was in this kind of movie. I did not expect this movie to go places like that. Again, think Hostel in this scenario. You know what I mean? Like really, again, homages to other horror movies that they're taking influence from, and in the good way, in the right way, to deliver something that is thrilling and exciting. The movie, I'll admit, the movie took a little while for me to get going. Like the first, 30 minutes or so, I was not won over yet. I was like, okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm not won over. But I thought that it was necessary to give you that backstory so that when the switch happens, when the character of Becky makes the decision to fight back, it's earned. You understand why. You understand that she's gotten to a point where she feels like, you know what, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going after these guys. There's no reason for me to run. I'm going after these guys. I liked that. I liked that the movie earned that moment. Again, you have to suspend your disbelief when you think of Becky as the protagonist fighting back, but the movie does everything it can to try to help you along and give you enough tools in the toolbox to make that assessment, to make the leap with this movie and give it its premise. And I did, and I was rewarded for it. I think it's a lot of fun. Great gore, great action scenes, really strong performances. I don't think there's really any weak links in the movie. There's some dog violence, be forewarned. But other than that, like this movie's just fun, but also taking it seriously. Again, it's not playing it for laughs; it's playing it for fun. I mean, for seriousness. But it's a fun ride seeing these Nazis get what for. So I definitely would recommend it. And it was I'm not the only one. Everybody seemed to like this. It's very good scores, like Rotten Tomatoes, like critical acclaim. It seems like it's done very very well. Like I said, in the pandemic, it seemed to be very popular, but it seemed like it kind of cooled off. Like it got a lot of buzz when it first came out. And of course, I'm late to that party, like I always am, but they seemed like everybody liked it, and then it seemed like it kind of cooled off a bit. They did make a sequel, Wrath of Becky, which I haven't seen yet, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure the movie deserves or wants a sequel. Like I think it's kind of a one and done for me. I don't know why you'd try to revisit this well, but maybe. I mean, it's got Lulu Wilson in it again. And I do really like her, so I will probably wind up checking that out at some point. But the original, I think it's really a fun time, worth a watch. A really good example of fighting back in a way that is balancing out fun and seriousness and really earning that moment. So I think it's great, and I would love to hear what you guys think about it too if you've seen it, and I know many of you probably have. Let me know in the comments what you think of it, because I'm pretty high on it. Obviously, it shows up for the doctorate level, and I would like to know if you guys agree or if you think it's not as good as I say it is. So that's our doctorate level pick for the fighting back subgenre. But of course, I've also got an extra credit movie for you, because I really enjoy these kinds of movies. And there's probably many I can pick from, but this is the one I decided to choose. This movie for extra credit is The Final. The Final came out in 2010 and is directed by a man named Joey Stewart. I'm not really familiar with Joey's work, but it is a definitely much more obscure movie than Becky, which was kind of more mainstream, but just newer. This one's a little lesser known, a little bit more obscure. It doesn't really have a lot of reviews, and they're not super positive, to be honest with you. But it's an After Dark Horror Fest movie, and viewers of the channel know I really like the After Dark Horror Fest. I really enjoy those movies. We're going to be going into them in quite some detail in the future, and I've talked about a few of them on the channel already. But The Final is one that I think is a little underrated, so we're going to get into that right now. If you haven't seen it before, and I'm guessing a lot of you haven't, the movie takes place in a high school setting, and it's about a group of young teens that are, kind of picked on as being losers or weird or whatever, and they are, the popular kids are really kind of, abusing them and bullying them, and they decide to fight back by coming up and concocting a plan to get their revenge by setting up a fake party where they will take all of these kids hostage and then teach them some very valuable lessons in ways that are pretty gruesome. But I will stop there so as to not spoil the hijinks that go on in this movie. But it's an interesting take for fighting back. And I actually had to think about this a little bit because it feels a little bit more like revenge, because it's, basically taking revenge on a past wrong. But it's also fighting back in the moment, because we see the kids getting bullied, and then we see them planning this event. And it's like the planning itself is part of the fighting back, because once they start planning it, it's like they reach this sense of calm and peace, because they know everything that they're taking, all the abuse they're taking, all the bullying they're taking is gonna get its retribution, because they're planning it out now. Just the act of planning out their revenge is a form of fighting back. And I liked that aspect of it. And kind of like, Don't Breathe, you got this weird situation where the people that are doing the fighting back, you have to question the morality of it, because what they're doing is wrong, and especially in the political climate, or the social climate, I should say, that we live in now, and even then back then 15 years ago in 2010, is problematic. The idea of bullying is bad and frowned upon, and we all agree with that. But the idea of killing a bunch of students because they're bullies, also a bad idea. School shootings are a big issue in this country and for society. And so the idea that you're kind of rooting for these kids who have guns and are going to kill a bunch of students is a little weird, but the movie does a good job of making the bullies so over the top bad that you feel comfortable enough rooting for it, at least for a while. And I like that premise. I like the idea that there's a group of losers, not a single loser, not a pair of losers, a group of losers. And I'm using the term loosely because that's kind of how the movie's framing it with the bullies and everything like that. But this group of kids who are using their knowledge of movies, their knowledge of science and all this, all this stuff, all their intelligence to enact this plan of revenge is a fun idea. Now, it's a low budget movie and that does hurt it a bit. The direction on this is flat. It's a very cheap looking aesthetic. It's mostly in one place and it's very basic. Like this movie has no imagination with the way it's shot in terms of camera angles and stuff like that. And the performances are not fantastic. There's some questionable ones. Many of the kids, especially the bullies, look way, way too old to be in high school. And the acting is not sharp. The dialogue is not sharp. There is a leader to the group of losers that is a monologuer, and his monologues are a bit cringeworthy. He prattles on quite a bit, and it's a little exhausting. But I'll contend that that's the point because his fellow, compatriots, his co-conspirators, start to turn on that a little bit. They don't like some of the stuff that he's saying, and it's kind of again. I don't want to go into spoilers there, but the low budget does hurt the movie a bit. Like, I mean, they even have some scenes that are repeated. Like, there's a couple of scenes where like people trying to escape are being chased by the losers on ATVs, and they are repeating shots. In fact, there's some shots where somebody has already left and they're in that shot even though they're not there anymore. So, like, some cheapness to it that does hurt the movie, and I think probably drives some of the negative reviews. Like, there are flaws in the movie. I'm not gonna hide that from you. But I really enjoy the movie anyways because I enjoy the premise and I enjoy the way it plays out. The idea of this group of kids, this group of losers banding together to plot this revenge is cool to me because I feel like it's more realistic. I feel like that displays more of what you would see in real life. Very, very few people would be so isolated that they don't have somebody else to connect with. And I like the idea that this group of kids are all being picked on in one way or another. And so they find each other. That's what people do, right? And so they have each other, and that's what drives the ability to execute this plan. I like that. I also like that they humanize these characters, the losers, and again, I'm using that term loosely. Go with it. But they humanize them, just showing what their home lives are. And they have these disparate home lives where they're either ignored or abused or whatever. That feeds into why they would do what they're going to do. That said, you do again have to suspend your disbelief a little bit because the logistics of this plan are a little far-fetched. That it works out rather well, but hard to believe that it would work out so well. And even with as smart as the kids are, hard to believe that, and also hard to believe that they would leap to this extreme idea. There's some homages to other movies in there, and they're kind of a meta references, if you will. Like, you can tell that these kids have watched horror movies, and they're using that to influence their plan. There's overt homages to Deliverance and Hostel and Audition. Like, they're flat out, I would say, ripping it off, except that that's kind of the point, is that the kids have been inspired by these movies and they're using that to exact their revenge. And I love that. I think that's a great idea. It's one of my favorite things about the movie is that it kind of roots it in reality. Again, they flesh these characters out, these kids, these losers, to being like something you feel sympathy for, because I mean, all of us as horror fans, we maybe not always super popular, and liking this stuff's not always popular, and the ideas that they get from that, we recognize where they're getting them from. It's a fun meta touch to it that I thought worked really, really well. And the ending of the movie, again, I won't spoil it for you, but I question if it's super effective, but I do like that it's not as obvious as I was expecting it to be. It didn't quite go the way I thought it was going to go, and I think that's a good thing. The movie is trying to be challenging. It's trying to present a group of people that you sympathize with and that you want to see fight back, and then it gets to a point where you're like, okay, maybe this is going too far, and maybe I feel bad for rooting them on. And I think they thread that needle pretty well. I think that they did a good job with this, and I really like it. And again, this movie is not beloved. It's not super well known, but I like it a lot. And so I wanted to talk about it. And I decided to put it here as extra credit because I think I like Becky Moore. It's just that simple. I like Becky Moore. So that got the nod as the doctorate. But I still want to talk about this one and shine a little bit of a light on it. Again, I want to manage your expectations. It is low budget. It's not the most amazing acting. This movie could be remade with a little bit of money and made really, really well. It could be really, really good. The gore could be really like reveled in rather than kind of cut away because they don't have the budget like it does in this movie. The actors could be stronger. You could get some really strong actors, maybe some age appropriate actors, and you could get some set design that would look really nice and some camera work that would be really good. But these to me don't hinder the movie from being good because I think that the concept is really strong. And while the dialogue's not great, I think that the story in terms of the script in terms of story works rather well for me. So I would recommend this one. I think that even though the concepts are pretty heavy and hard, the movie's not that hard of a watch overall. So, maybe again, if you are interested and you're sensitive, maybe do some research to see if you can hang with it. But I definitely think it's worth checking out, and not enough people have, so that's why I'm bringing it up. So if you haven't seen it, give it a chance, and let me know what you think in the comments, because I'd like to know if you guys see it the way I do, or if you think it is just kind of bad, and because it's a valid argument. So I love it, but I acknowledge its shortcomings. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. So that's going to do it for our revisiting into the fighting back subgenre. Like I said, I really enjoy movies like this. I think they're very satisfying watches because you kind of get the bad guys getting their comeuppance, and I love that kind of stuff. And that's why I wanted to talk more about it and wanted to talk about more movies, including a movie that maybe you haven't seen before and a movie that I think a lot of people have seen, but I just really enjoy. So if you haven't seen these, check them out for sure. And now it's time for me to check out a horror trivia pursuit card. As usual, I'm going to read a card here live on camera and then not cut while I try to answer it and hopefully not embarrass myself. And let's go with the psychological category for the card because most of these fighting back movies have a very strong psychological aspect to them. And in this case, both Becky and the final really delved into the psychological aspect of the people who have to fight back in a very strong way. So, psychological question. Here we go. What is the phrase Wendy finds repeatedly typed on the entire manuscript of her husband Jack in 1980's The Shining? This one's pretty easy, right? Now, well, maybe not. If you're younger and maybe you've never seen The Shining, maybe you're not familiar with this, but I mean, back in my day, for horror fans in particular, this was such a catchphrase. This was such a well-known and established thing from The Shining. It was like a pop culture reference, you know what I mean? A meme before memes. It's so well known. So I think this is a really easy one. I, of course, know what it is, but I'm prattling on a little bit because, I like to give you guys some time to think about it. And we have talked about The Shining more than once on this channel, frankly, and I love it. It is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen because I saw it when I was way too young to be seeing it, frankly. Thanks, Mom. And it's got so much going on. I mean, they even make documentaries about it, and it's really fascinating to see all of the subtext that's in this movie and all of the different meanings that people have derived from it. It's wild. Room 237, which we've also talked about in here, the documentary about The Shining. We've talked about that on the channel too, and it's definitely worth a watch. If you love The Shining, you should check that out. But man, it's such a great movie, and if you haven't seen it, you're A, going to probably have a hard time answering this question, and B, you should see it. It's a must-see for your horror education. Definitely see The Shining, and actually check out Doctor Sleep, the sequel, which we are going to talk about in the future on the channel because it's surprisingly good. Mike Flanagan, can't go wrong with that. Okay, I have prattled on long enough. You either know this or you don't, or if you don't know, you're going to take a guess, and I'd like to hear those guesses, especially if they wind up being wrong. But the right answer, I'm going to say, lock in your answer, right? My answer is all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. I'll double check the card just to be sure. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, in quotes right there on the card. Yeah, that one's an easy one, right? That's so famous. It's such a famous line, but it's such a great scene. Especially because if you look at the pages when she's looking at them, it doesn't just say it over and over again straight through. It's written in prose form, like in paragraphs and stuff like that. He's written it in paragraph form. It's not just copy, repeat, paste, and copy and paste or whatever. It's not like that. And so it's wild. It's wild. And especially again, 1980, right? They're not a computer, so it sat there and typed all of that out for pages and pages and pages and pages. So I love The Shining. I love that scene. I'm guessing most of you got it right, but again, if you didn't get it right, let me know what you said in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for hanging out to the end of the video. I appreciate you. Until next week, when we do something completely different, I'm just going to say, class dismissed.